Hi. So my name's Ian. In case we haven't met, hi. How you doing? Great. So if you were here last week, um, we had just a little tech thing go on. Let's not go on about it too much. But as a result of that tech thing, I was sat just over there behind stage, watching Adam preach. I was on a little mixing desk. If anybody thought Steve Shaleswell was being really rude, sat in the front row texting, he was texting me like guitars up, piano down a bit. He was like remote mixing on WhatsApp. So it was all very interesting. However, as I sat and I watched Adam speak, I was amazed because we're not in any kind of series at the moment. We're just, coming with what God's given us. And Adam was talking about handling a crisis. He was talking about how Jacob handled crises. And I was sat there thinking, wow, next week I'm planning to speak on Isaac, who's Jacob's father, and how Isaac handles problems. So I was amazed and blessed. And if we'd planned a mini-series on crisis and problem management, I don't think we could have got it any more queued up. In fact, anyway, let's not go into that. So I was amazed. It was great news. When you know that you're coming, well, hopefully you're coming with something that's relevant anyway. So there we go. So we're going to read a little story about Isaac from Genesis 26. If we can put that up. Genesis 26, 12 to 22. Isaac planted crops in that land, and the same year reaped 100-fold, because the Lord blessed him. The man became rich, and his wealth continued to grow until he became very wealthy. He had so many flocks and herds and servants that the Philistines envied him. So all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of his father Abraham, the Philistines stopped up, filling them with earth. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Move away from us, you become too powerful for us." So Isaac moved away from there and camped in the valley of Gerar, where he settled. Isaac reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham died, and he gave them the same names his father had given them. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and discovered a well of fresh water there, but the herders of Gerar quarreled with those of Isaac and said, "The water is ours." So he named the well Ezek, because they disputed with him. Then they dug another well, but they quarreled over that also, so he named it Sitnah. He moved on from there and dug another well, and no one quarreled over it. He named it Rehoboth, saying, "Now the Lord has given us room, and we will flourish in the land." So everything's going great for Isaac, right? He is a wealthy guy. He's doing really well. He has flocks, and he has servants. He's become really powerful. Everything's going great. He's not like Jacob, right? Jacob, as we heard last week, was in a crisis. Jacob was a cheater. Jacob was a briber. Jacob was a runner. Jacob was a bit of a scoundrel. And he brought trouble on himself, didn't he? He brought trouble on himself. There was always something going on in Jacob's life. And he had to admit that he brought his trouble on himself. Some of the way he'd lived, Jacob, had placed him in a place of crisis. And he was literally wrestling with himself and with God. That's where he got to. Literally wrestling with himself and with God. Because he'd just messed around so much. But Isaac's done nothing. I mean, all right, don't get me wrong, he's not perfect. But Isaac has done nothing to bring this trouble on himself. Abimelech says to him, "Get away from us. You're too powerful. The Philistines come and fill in his wells, and he has to move." He's done nothing to bring the trouble on himself. Just look back briefly with me. It's just at the beginning of the chapter, Genesis 26, 3 to 5. God says to him, and the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and will give you, your offspring, all these lands. And in your offspring, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Isaac's from rich heritage. And he did what God said. He stayed in the land. He didn't go running off to Egypt. He didn't do what Jacob might have done when trouble came, do a runner, or maybe work out some kind of bribe he can do with his brother Esau, or wrestle with God all night. He didn't do any of that. He did exactly what God told him to do. He stayed in the land that was promised to him. He's literally in the promise. But still there's trouble. Still there's trouble. But Isaac knows what to do in a crisis, okay? He knows how to handle things when trouble comes his way. It says this, 17 to 18. So Isaac moved away from there and camped in the valley of Gerar, where he settled. He reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up. And he gave them the same names his father had given them. So, this is what struck me about this. He leaves where he was, but stays in the land, and he moves away from Abimelech. And he finds the old wells of his father. He goes to a place where his father was blessed. And he redigs the wells that belonged to his father. And not only that, not only does he redig the wells that belong to his father, he gives them the same names. Isaac knows what he's doing. He knows where he is. He's in a very, very familiar place. He's not run off to somewhere new. He's stuck where he knows. He's stuck with the blessing. He's stuck with God's promises. That's what he was doing. It's like he was saying, this is my spot. This is my spot. My dad was here. And I know my dad was here because I'm going to give these places the same names that they had before. He's fully honouring his father, isn't he? And he's, I wonder, as his servants started to dig those wells, as they broke the ground and they started to dig up the earth, I wonder how he felt. I wonder, as they dug out the gravel and they removed the dirt, I wonder how Isaac felt, because these are his father's wells. These are Abraham's wells. This is Abraham's place. This is where my dad was. I wonder if he remembered the times that he spent with his father. I wonder if he remembered the things that his father had taught him. I wonder when he took the first drink as they drew on the well, was it a familiar taste for him? I wonder if he'd been there with his dad when his dad had dug the wells, and whether he'd drunk the water before. Isaac knew exactly what he was doing when he went and he redug his father's wells. When we face trouble, when a crisis comes along, when problems hit, maybe like Jacob, you know full well you've brought it on yourself, right? It's possible, isn't it? Sometimes things happen, and we know we've brought it on ourselves. Sometimes, as Adam taught us last week, when crises stick around, we have to look inside of ourselves and say, God, what are you teaching me? What are you teaching me from this? And we need to look at what God's trying to do with us. But sometimes trouble is just trouble. Sometimes you have done absolutely nothing to precipitate it, like Isaac. You've done nothing. You've stayed in God's promises. You've done what God said. You've hit the nail on the head. You have done all the things that it says in the Bible to do, and yet you're still getting trouble. All kinds of things can come along, can't they? Sickness can bring trouble. Loss and bereavement can bring trouble. Relationship breakdown, it can bring trouble. Children can bring trouble, can't they? Bless them. But children can bring trouble. Just economics, right? business, work, finance can bring trouble on us, can't it? Even though we've stayed in the place of blessing, even though we've done everything that God ever asked of us. In those times, we can take Jacob's example and we can do a runner. We can try and trick our way out of it. Or we can take Isaac's example and we can stick in our place of blessing. We can stay in the place that God has instructed us to stay in. We can draw on the blessings that he's given us. We can dig up old wells. We can dig down, we can dig deep, and we can drink again of the fresh water of God's blessings for us. We can take Isaac's example rather than Jacob. So, right, you're very quiet. You are all there, aren't you? Cool, perfect. Can't actually see you either. So I'm not talking about sentimentalism, right? I'm not talking about going back over old things and trying to relive them. I'm not talking about England winning the World Cup in 1966. That is something that is not going to come round again, right? There's no point being sentimental about England winning the World Cup. It is so not coming home, right? I got excited. Do you know what? I was lulled last year. Was it last year, the World Cup? Anyway, I was lulled, and I started believing that football was coming home. Never again. I'm not talking about sentimentalism. I'm not going back there. I'm not talking about living in old things. I'm not talking about that. You know, in Philippians, Paul says, he says, I'm single-minded, forgetting what is behind, I'm reaching forward for the things that God has for us that are ahead. That's repentance, isn't it? Turning away from my old life. I've turned away from my old life. I'm not talking about being sentimental about England winning the World Cup and the old ways of how things used to be. Oh, wasn't it great? Oh, the songs we used to sing, the days we used to have. I'm not talking about being sentimental, and I'm not talking about living in my old life. I've put that behind me. And I'm not talking about just remembering, just looking back on and conjuring up thoughts of good things, like somehow that can help us. Andrew said this a few weeks back when talking about vision. He said, the vision of God is much bigger than just the yesteryear. Our testimony is about the testimony of God tomorrow, not the testimony of God yesterday. The testimony of God of that which is yet to come. We're not just the church of what we did, are we? You don't need a vision for that. We've already got that. We're pressing forward for something new, aren't we? So I'm not talking about just conjuring up old thoughts and happy memories. Can I give you an example? A story in Luke 24, if we can put that up. Luke 24, 13 to 35. There we go. That very day, this is following the death of Jesus, two of the disciples. That very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it's now the third day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." And he said to them, Oh, foolish ones. What a nice response. Thanks, Jesus. Oh, foolish ones and slow of heart to believe all the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going further, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it is towards evening, and the day is now far spent." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened. What a moment. What a moment. Can you imagine? Jesus, the resurrected Jesus in front of them, breaking bread. And he vanished from their sight. And they said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he spoke, while he talked to us on the road, while he opened the scriptures to us?" And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered, saying, "The Lord is risen indeed and has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of bread. What a moment. What an incredible moment. Jesus appears to them and breaks bread. And whilst they're still sat there, the bread in front of them, and Jesus is gone. Whilst they're still sat there, they say to each other, "Do you remember when he was talking to us on the road? Didn't our hearts burn within us? Didn't our hearts burn within us as he opened the scriptures? Aren't our hearts burning right now?" And that's what I'm talking about this morning. I'm not talking about sentimentalism. I'm not talking about looking back on things that are never going to happen. I'm not talking about just going over old things. I'm not talking about living in my old life. I'm talking about encouraging ourselves with the things that God has done in our lives. I'm talking about digging up old wells and drawing deep on the things that God has done for us so that our hearts burn. So that our hearts burn within us. That's what I'm talking about. Just like the disciples who listened to Jesus and afterwards, in the night, got up and went 7 miles back to Jerusalem. So excited were they at what had happened. Do you remember? Do you remember when you were saved? Can you recall it right now for me? When he provided for you when you were desperate? Do you remember that time you were healed? Can you raise it up from your memory for me right now? Can you pull it forward in your mind? Do you remember the word that came? The encouragement that was just at the right time? Do you remember? Doesn't your heart burn within you right now? Doesn't your heart burn within you right now as you remember what God did? This is what Isaac was doing. This is what he was doing. Trouble was coming. Trouble was heading his way, and he went back to a place that he knew. He went back to a blessing that he knew, and he dug down. He dug down deep, and he tasted freshness. That testimony that you have of what God has done for you is like a well of fresh water. I want you to dig it up this morning. It's really easy, isn't it? It's really easy for our wells to get blocked up. You know? It's really easy. It's really easy to look back and think, that's not going to happen again. You know? And then there's days when you pray and you're disappointed. There's times you pray and you don't get an answer. And your well is filled and dried a little bit. The day-to-day, just days, just sometimes just bad days. It's like gravel that falls in and it fills up the well and you start to forget what you did. Your heart doesn't burn anymore as it did. Then there's big things that happen. There's big things, loss and bereavement, breakdown and financial trouble, and boulders fall in. They roll in and they fill up. And before you know it, the ground's covered. And that freshness is gone. It's gone. And anything can hit me right now. Anything can come along and knock me over because I've got nothing to draw on. I've got nothing. I've got nothing left. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to taste that freshness again. Are you ready? Are you ready to taste the freshness again of the things that God has done in your lives? So as you face the future, as we move forward into this vision that God has got for us, we've got something to draw on. Are you ready? Because this is what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to dig them up. I'm going to dig up my wells. I brought my spade today. I'm just going to put my spade down here, and it's going to speak to you. We're going to dig up the dry wells. I'm going to dig down. I'm going to break the ground on bad days. And I'm going to put them behind me. That's what I'm doing this morning. I'm putting the bad days behind me. I'm going to dig out the disappointment. I'm going to put it away. Because God has done great things in my life. I'm going to lift out the boulders. I'm going to crouch down and I'm going to pull them out. And you know, for these, I might need some help. I might need the help of my life group, of my friends, of my brothers and sisters, but I'm going to lift out those boulders. I'm going to take out those heavy things that have weighed me down, and I'm throwing them away. I'm putting them behind me. And I'm going to draw deep. I'm going to draw deep. And when I reach the water, I'm going to take a good long drink. Where's my water? I'm going to take a good long drink. I'm going to be refreshed. I'm going to be refreshed in the things that God has done for me. I'm going to dig deep down. I'm going to say, Lord, you're the same God. You're the same God that you were when you blessed me. You don't change, Lord. You've not suddenly changed your mind about me and become somebody different. You're the same God that you were. You know, it says that in James. It says, every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or the slightest hint of change. In him, there is no variation. So you can be sure, if he did it once, he'll do it again. If he did it in my life before, he's the same God. He's going to do it again. If I prayed a prayer and he answered, he's going to do it again. If he provided for me, he's going to do it again. If he healed me, he's going to do it again. You are chosen, and you are precious, and you are blessed. What he did for you before, he'll do again. What he did for your mother and your father, he'll do it again. He'll do it again. Don't doubt him this morning. God loves you, and he's here to bless you. So, dig up the old wells with me, will you? Dig up your old wells. And don't forget what he did. So that's what we do in our household when trouble comes. This is what we do. We had 3 things we were praying for once. I forget why these 3 things came together the way they did. But I needed a pay rise. Again, I forget, I don't know if it was a mortgage or something, but I needed a pay rise. Jen had applied for a job, and we were waiting to hear about that. And I still had this flat that I used to live in that I couldn't sell. So I had a tenant living in this flat. And my goodness, this guy was a very difficult tenant. He was wrecking the place, problems with the neighbours. It was becoming a real problem. And Jen went out one day and she walked around the park and she prayed. She asked God for those 3 things. And then she called me. I was at work. Now, what she didn't know is my boss had taken me into his office and given me a pay rise. She called me and she said, Ian, I've just heard. I got the job. And then I got an email from my tenant, and this is in the space of an hour, these three things. I got an email from my tenant saying, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to move out before Christmas. And I was like, oh, what a shame. Seriously, I don't know how long Jen prayed for. She tells me she walked around the park praying. In 1 hour, bang, bang, bang. So when problems come our way, that's one of the wells we dig up. That's one of the wells. 2.5 years ago, Jen and I were trying to buy a house. We were trying to sort schools out for the kids, and Jen had applied for a British Academy fellowship. 5% of people who apply for these fellowships get funding. And again, it was stressful and it was crazy. Hi guys. It was stressful and it was crazy. But a friend encouraged us that everything would fall into place. And Jen looked at the address of the house where we live now, and the postcode is JE3 1BA. 1 British Academy Fellowship. And Jen went, oh, that's it. I'm serious. And we stood on that. Sometimes just something clicks and you go, I'm standing on that. I'm taking my stand in this valley now, and I'm digging this well. I'm going to build an altar later. I'm going to stand on it. 1 British Academy Fellowship. And sure enough, she was one of the 5% who received this funding. And sure enough, we were blessed after battling, but the house was ours. And the school, it was the right school, it's around the corner, and everything fell into place. So when trouble comes our way, there's another well that we dig up, and we remember what God did. So we're confident in who he is. I'm going to dig out one more well for you. One of our boys had a heart condition. He had an arrhythmia. It was quite a stressful situation for us, difficult. And he was on medication. The medication wasn't working particularly well, so he was needing a procedure. It's not the most serious procedure ever, but still, it's your son, and it's a heart procedure. You worry, don't you? I was with Tim and John. We were praying. It was New Year. We were praying, and I was chatting with Tim about this, and we were going to see. We'd had a bad appointment that week, and we were going to see a consultant to get another opinion to find out what was happening. We were worried. We were concerned. And John came over from the other side of the room, and he said, your boy with the heart condition. He said, yeah, I just feel we should pray for him. And I looked at Tim as though to say, have you told him? And Tim went, no. And John just prayed a simple prayer. He just prayed God would bless him and he would heal him, he would look after him. But in the car on the way home, suddenly I just knew, God, you are in this moment. For whatever reason, you've chosen to speak right now. You've chosen that little thing. We were in the middle of a crisis, and your word came. Your word came, a prayer, a blessing, and a healing. Your word came. And from that moment on, things switched. And I remembered just a phrase that came into my head, not one more. And I got angry, and I prayed, and in the car on the way home, I prayed this prayer, Lord, no more episodes, not one more. And I started telling people, I told John, and I told Tim, and I told Rich, and I told a few other people, this is what I'm praying now, not one more. And I was getting text messages agreeing with me. And you know what? He did have the procedure, and praise God, they did a great job, and he's free of it. But between February the 12th, shortly after that prayer meeting, and June the something, not a single episode. And he'd been having them every day. Every day. We'd had ambulances, we did that. Do you know what? When sickness comes, there's a well we dig up. There's a well we dig up. And if God has done it before, he's going to do it again. These are the things that we stand on. So I want to encourage you this morning. Let's just stand together. We're going to worship. As we worship, I want you to encourage yourselves. I want you to remember what God has done for you. I want you to dig out old wells. I want you to drink on the fresh water. I want you to dig new wells and drink on that fresh water. God's going to do for you what he did before. God's going to do more than he's done before for you. Those situations that you're facing, God is here for you today in those situations. We'd love to pray with you. I'm sure there'll be time to do that. But let's, as we worship now, let's remember what God has done. Let's encourage ourselves like the disciples did, whose hearts burnt within them as they recalled the words of Jesus. Amen.